The stew was still warm. That's what made it so terrifying. When fur trapper Joe LaBelle walked into the Inuit village at Anjikuni Lake in November 1930, he expected to find his friends, the families he'd visited dozens of times before. Instead, he found their dinners still cooking on the stove, their fires still burning in the hearth, their rifles still leaning against the walls. But the people? All 30 of them. Gone. So where did they go? Let me take you back to that night. Northern Canada. The kind of cold that bites through your clothes and into your bones. Joe LaBelle had been trapping fur in these territories for years. He knew every frozen lake, every stand of trees, every village along his route. And tonight he was headed to one of his regular stops. A small Inuit settlement on the shores of Anjikuni Lake. He'd been there dozens of times before. The people always welcomed him. Warm fires, hot food, stories traded back and forth. It was one of the few places out here that felt like home. But as Joe crested the final hill and looked down at the village, something felt wrong. There was no smoke rising from the chimneys, no sound echoing across the frozen lake, no dogs barking, just silence. Joe quickened his pace, his boots crunching through the snow. As he got closer, his unease grew. The village looked abandoned, but not in the way places usually look abandoned. He pushed open the door of the first house. Inside, a fire smoldered in the hearth, still warm. A pot of caribou stew sat on the stove, half-cooked. Someone had been here recently, very recently. But where were they? Joe moved to the next house, same thing, warm fire, food left out, personal belongings untouched. He checked a third house, then a fourth. Every single one was the same, frozen in time. As if the people had simply stood up mid-meal and walked away. His heart pounding, Joe searched the entire village. 30 people lived here, families he knew by name. And every single one of them was gone. Joe was a tracker, one of the best. If people had left this village, he'd find their trail. He circled the perimeter, scanning the snow for footprints, sled marks, anything. Nothing. The snow around the village was undisturbed. That's when he noticed the kayaks still tied up at the shore. In the Arctic, your kayak isn't just a boat. It's your lifeline. You don't leave it behind unless you have no choice. Then he found the rifles, propped against doorways, leaning in corners. In 1930, in the Canadian wilderness, your rifle meant survival. Leaving it behind was unthinkable. Finally, behind one of the houses, Joe found the sled dogs. 7 of them, still tied to their posts. All dead. They'd starved to death, unable to break free. Joe felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Joe didn't waste time. He made his way to the nearest outpost and contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. When he told them what he'd found, they didn't believe him at first. An entire village? Vanished? It sounded impossible. But Joe LaBelle wasn't known for telling tall tales. The RCMP launched an investigation. When they arrived at Anjikuni Lake, they found exactly what Joe had described. Warm fires, abandoned food. No tracks, no bodies, no explanation. They searched the surrounding wilderness for weeks. They interviewed nearby communities. They investigated every possible lead. They found nothing. The official report concluded that the fate of the Anjikuni Lake villagers was unknown. In the months that followed, the story spread. Locals whispered about what might have happened. Some said it was the spirits of the north, angered by something the villagers had done. Others spoke of strange lights seen in the sky that November. The more rational minds suggested the villagers had simply relocated. Maybe they'd heard of better hunting grounds, or maybe disease had forced them to flee. But that didn't explain the lack of footprints, the abandoned supplies, the dead dogs. Over the years, the theories multiplied. Alien abduction, a secret government experiment, a mass hysteria event, a natural disaster that left no trace. But here's the thing. Modern researchers have found something interesting. There are no official RCMP records of this investigation. No newspaper articles from 1930. The first mention of the Anjikuni Lake disappearance appears in a sensationalized book published in 1959, nearly 30 years after it supposedly happened. So did it even happen at all? Maybe Joe LaBelle stumbled upon a seasonal camp that had been temporarily abandoned. Maybe he embellished what he saw, and the story grew with each retelling. Maybe someone made the whole thing up decades later, and it became an urban legend. Or maybe, on that cold November night in 1930, something truly inexplicable happened at Anjikuni Lake. Maybe 30 people did vanish without a trace, leaving behind only questions and empty houses, and the echo of lives suddenly interrupted. We'll probably never know for sure. Today, if you travel to northern Canada and ask the locals about Anjikuni Lake, some will tell you the story. Others will wave it off as nonsense. But on quiet winter nights, when the wind howls across the frozen lakes and the northern lights dance overhead, it's easy to imagine Joe LaBelle walking into that silent village, pushing open that first door, and finding nothing. Some mysteries are meant to be solved. Others are meant to remind us that the world is stranger than we think.